Good morning, everyone. My name is Rich Sloma. Welcome to today's New York State Archives presentation of Inventorying Your Electronic Records. Today's presenters are Maria McCashion and Karen Rabatin. Maria is the New York State Archives Records Advisory Officer, or RAO, for cities, fire districts, and New York City municipal agencies, and Karen is with our scheduling and state agency services. The session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box to the right side of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And now I will turn the presentation over to Maria.
Thank you, Rich.
Being recorded.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Today, Karen and I will be talking about electronic records. These are records that are created, maintained, or deleted in a digital format, and they have the same record-keeping requirements as paper records, but they involve different types of software, file types, and operating systems for their access. And just like paper records, it's important for records managers to know about their electronic records and to develop plans to manage them. And it can be easy to use electronic records and systems, but understanding the systems and how they store and manage data can be challenging, especially if you're not technically oriented. An electronic records inventory is an effective way to begin the process of understanding your electronic records and the capabilities of the systems that create them. So today, Karen and I will be going over some key elements of an electronic records inventory. And Karen is going to talk about some important reasons to do one and discuss the kinds of systems and record series to focus on. And then I'll go over planning the inventory, talk about some tools that you can use to do the inventory, and talk about evaluating the data that you collect. And Karen will end the webinar with advice on using and maintaining the inventory data. Right now, Karen will get us started talking about some reasons why you should inventory your electronic records.
So let's get started. Let's begin by discussing why we should conduct an electronic records inventory. A records inventory is basically the foundation of a sound records management program, and it's often a first step in establishing that records management program. No matter how you organize your records, an inventory can provide an overview that will help you manage these records in the future. An electronics inventory also will help you identify what systems are managing records, what records these systems are managing, and where the records are located throughout your government or agency. It will provide an opportunity to collect baseline data about your electronic records. Beyond just what and where they are, you collect information that's important for ongoing access and preservation of the records. An inventory can help you identify the strengths and weaknesses of the systems managing your records. It will help you set priorities based on the findings and manage your e-records proactively, consistently, and according to a plan rather than reactively, as in a response to a crisis or immediate need. You can also formulate a plan of action for ongoing management of electronic records. Keeping in mind the purpose of an inventory is not just to collect data. The data should be the basis of a strategic plan to address electronic records issues. In the plan, you can identify priorities and allocate resources, including staffing and funding, to address those priorities systematically. Legal requirements: you should also conduct an electronic records inventory to ensure compliance with laws that pertain to how government should manage their electronic records. State agencies and local governments must ensure their records comply with the Arts and Cultural Affairs Law. This defines records as existing in any media. This includes electronic, so your electronic records are subject to the same requirements as paper or microfilm records. For commissioners' regulations, which charge governments with including records retention and other records requirements in system design. Also ensuring records are usable for the full retention period, creating and maintaining documentation on the system and the records they contain, distributing backup copies, and ensuring media integrity. For the Freedom of Information Law requests, the 2008 amendments focus on access to electronic records. Electronic records cannot be created in a way that impairs both public inspection and copying. Electronic record systems should be designed to allow the segregation and retrieval of information to provide maximum public access. Fulfilling legal requirements places an emphasis on the electronic records inventory to prepare you in the event of litigation so that you know what you have, can provide records requested, and defend how your organization practices electronic records retention and disposition. Additional benefits of conducting the electronic records inventory are that it aids preservation and accessibility for the retention period. An inventory will identify permanent records so you can take steps to ensure that the current system records will be able to be accessed and read. Also, that these records will be included in a migration plan when formats, media, software, or hardware change. An inventory may assist in the disposal of obsolete electronic records. Fewer records means fewer to manage and maintain. Also, fewer records to migrate to new systems when technology changes. Another benefit is information and knowledge sharing as the records management officer. During an inventory, an RMO may find an application, records, or information that others use, and that they may help you or another functional group within your agency or local government. Another benefit is storage planning. An inventory can identify annual growth of electronic records to plan for storage, as well as identify obsolete records that can be disposed of, and this will free up space. An inventory may also identify non-records, such as publications and reference material. It can determine their quantity and also whether a plan is needed then to manage these non-records separately or remove them from a system altogether. And removing them from a system altogether is another means of freeing up more space. Interviews during the inventory may also reveal new department projects that may require the need for more storage space. Lastly, IT procurement and project planning. What's discovered during an inventory may initiate projects, such as one implementing an electronic content management system or ECMS. Projects that were already planned may be modified, for example, making plans to designate the electronic record the official record and eliminate a paper record when a system and its backup is determined able to support this change. Or even eliminate the need for a particular project in a case when enough space can be created by disposing of obsolete electronic records that a large server is when a large server is no longer necessary. So how does an organization know when to conduct an inventory? If your agency or government has already begun creating and storing electronic records, an electronic inventory hasn't been completed, then this is a case where an electronic inventory should be conducted. Another time would be if a significant change occurred in your organization or there was a significant change in your records management program. Examples might be starting a records management program from scratch, moving office space to a new location, or possibly key individuals who were part of the records management program or your organization are no longer with you, and you may be missing in-depth knowledge that they carried with them. You may also need to conduct an inventory if you're planning for a new electronic records management system. And another time would be if just significant time has passed since the previous electronic records inventory was conducted. So let's consider what records you will inventory. Electronic records can be categorized in two groups, structured and unstructured. Structured records are databases which have defined fields, rules for data entry, character limits, and sometimes defined contents for fields and are searchable. Structured records are basically managed by the application itself, unless the records are output to paper, such as when you would print a report, or you save a report to an electronic file format, such as a PDF file. Keep in mind that there are many unknowns about structured records and how the databases that hold them are designed. Databases may not be designed for record disposal. They may store instead data forever or appear to store data forever. An example might be some financial systems. This is a case where first-line support staff may not know the inner workings of a system, and contacting the vendor is required to get information. The expectation is that every database-driven application would be documented, and the data retention capabilities of each will be defined from the inventory. What other records should you consider? Well, the second major group is unstructured records. These records may be the individual files typically created using Word, Excel, or other desktop applications. Unstructured records include Word documents, emails, web pages. They also may consist of data that doesn't fit neatly into a data table because of its size or nature. For example, audio and video files and large text documents. These records often exist on individuals' PCs or even in an email account, and management of these unstructured records frequently depend on the end users. They're often not subject to consistent filing rules, even if filed on a shared directory. Creators often have their own filing name conventions and folder structure, which often aren't consistently applied even if the records are files on a shared directory. The files are well known to the to the creator but not easily understood by other users. For these reasons, unstructured records are very difficult to inventory and control. Unstructured records may also be easily copied and sent through email or copied to a USB flash drive or other drive. And this results in greater duplication and storage space consumed. Also, revision control becomes an issue. What is the latest or the official version of these copies that were being circulated? Unstructured records may be difficult to identify, control, and apply consistent retention requirements. So how should we proceed from here? You will focus on inventorying the structured electronic records of your organization, since these encompass the majority of key record systems. Will there be exceptions? Yes, most likely. There are some important permanent or long-term electronic records that will fall outside of these systems. Some examples could be board minutes, annual reports, audits, budgets, and these should be identified and inventoried as well. This will include any other long-term electronic records not maintained in a system or certain unstructured records. Not all records are stored on your network. They are also stored in vendor-managed application where the vendor controls the software and storage, or hosted services such as email and websites, or state agency applications used by governments such as real property data, federal agency applications used by state and local governments. Some examples could be like the STAR program or financial aid. Even local government applications used by other local governments. Some examples could be an example could be tax billing. For your inventory, you want to find out who controls the application and its data, what records are being stored, and you can use your retention schedule as an additional tool to assist you here. You also want to find out where the data is physically stored and how long is it retained. And for reference, the State Archives website does have some guidelines on using a data storage vendor. So feel free to access that information on our website. In an electronic records inventory, as with any inventory, we want to focus on aggregates of records or record series rather than individual records. Electronic records inventories are conducted at two levels. First, the record system level, with a system encompassing one or more record series rather than individual files. And an electronic record system may be a database, a software application, a document management system, or a file directory on a network server or a local PC. And second, then we have the records series level. Examples of electronic records systems, a database of information about current and former employees, municipal software with licensing programs, minutes and agendas scanned into an ECMS, time and attendance programs. There are also record series within each system. You will need to identify the record series encompassed in each records creating system. For example, in an electronic payroll system, the record series might include payroll distribution, year-end payroll, periodic payroll, or retirement reports. There may be systems with multiple record series. One municipal system might house multiple record series stored in several separate functional modules or applications. An example of this could be code enforcement with building permits, inspection records, certificates of occupancy, and other building regulation records. It, it could include a student information system where you have basic student data, attendance, grades, health records, etc. So Maria is going to go take us through planning the inventory. So I'm going to be passing the baton back to her.
Thank you, Karen. When you got your copy of the slides, we sent you a separate planning guide. It's a 3-page guide. The first page is pictured on the slide. So how you do the inventory is going to vary depending upon the purpose of your inventory and your organization's unique circumstances. In any case, the guide covers several things that you should consider when you're planning your inventory. So you want to determine the scope of your project, and that will include the purpose of your inventory. So for example, what is the purpose? Are you going to implement a program for managing electronic records? This is the first time you're inventoried the records and you're going to apply retention, identify records and apply retention, or are you addressing a problem like a legacy system? The scope will also include what you'll be focusing on. Are you going to focus on the systems of the entire organization, or one department, or one system? You also want to identify who will be involved in the inventory. Hopefully, that will include management, because you really want them involved. You need them to support the project, promote the project, and encourage participation. That's going to be key for your inventory. You also need a project director, so someone to oversee and coordinate the work. Of course, you need the records management officer to help people understand retention and disposition requirements and other records needs. System users, so the people who use the system, and IT, in whatever form that is for your organization, will be some of the best sources for information about the systems and the records contained in those systems. And you may also be doing the project with a consultant. You also need to know your organization and understand your work environment, or the work environment that you're going to be focusing on if you're not already familiar with it, in order to get a bigger picture of either the organization or a single unit or department. And that'll help you determine if there are any system relationships between units or people, and even just who to contact for questions or to get more information. You also want to know your technology environment, of course, and that's going to involve meeting with IT or whoever the person is in charge of maintaining systems, and learning what they know about the system or systems that are the focus of the inventory. And of course, you want to develop a strategy for the inventory, including making a schedule to meet with all those people involved, to prepare the tools for data collection, and also to gather and analyze the data, and then finally to make a plan. As Karen mentioned, retention schedules may be helpful to share with the staff involved to help determine what records may exist. So pictured on the slides, I hope you recognize these. These are the local government schedule, the LGS1, and also for state agencies, the state agency general schedule. The functional headings in these schedules may help point staff to records involved in certain systems. So just an example would be records in a finance or a personnel system. State agencies will also have records disposition authorizations that cover state agency records with unique functions that are not found in the general schedule. The general schedule covers common administrative, fiscal, and personnel records of state agencies. Also, when you're identifying the records, you may find that there are obsolete records in some of these systems. You don't want to include those in the inventory, but you do want to note them and address them after the inventory. Determining how obsolete records will be disposed of and developing procedures for regular disposal could become part of the records management plan that results from the inventory. The State Archives has a sample destruction authorization form with instructions that you can use to track the obsolete records that are identified during your inventory, and that form and the instructions could become part of your disposal procedures. The form's available on the State Archives website under Records Management and our Forms and Tools page. And if you want to read more about that form, there's also a publication, our Retention and Disposition publication, also under Records Management on the Publications page. So once you've determined your project focus and the systems and the records and the people involved, conducting the inventory is going to involve preparing your tools, talking with IT departments and staff, and that discussion will involve explaining the inventory and how it's used or how it works, the benefits of doing the inventory, scheduling interviews. IT might be the first person that you want to interview because you may want to find out what preliminary data they might already have and can provide you with, and that could save a lot of time with your data collection. And then after the initial data is collected, you'll need to have time to review the data, and there may be a follow-up period for refining the data. So generally, Karen mentioned this, you're going to be gathering system information and record series information. And different information is collected about each, so it's a good idea to use different forms for each. The State Archives has tools that you can use to prepare your inventory, to do your inventory, or you can use those tools to prepare your own inventory. These are available on our Forms and Tools page, and the link is included on the slide. There you'll find an Access database, which is free to download. The database includes two forms that integrate for collecting data on each system and individual record series that a system contains. There are also instructions with the data fields that you'll be using and examples of the type of data to enter into the different fields. If you don't want to use our Access database, you could put these in a spreadsheet, or you might start with paper forms, gather the data, review the data, and then enter it into a database. My point here being that ideally you want to keep your inventory in some type of a database so that it's easy to update and maintain. It's also helpful when you're talking with people to have a notepad or something to write down comments or issues or information that is new or observed during the interviews that may not fit into the database, but is information that is important and you want to use it to develop your plan at the end of the inventory. So this is just a screenshot of the free access database that the archives developed that you could use for your inventory. This is a view of the database systems form. So it connects, as I mentioned, to a second form for records information. You can see the link to the form for records, form for systems in the upper left-hand corner. Ideally, you want to enter the system's information first, and when that's complete, each system is automatically added to a drop-down menu on the records form, and that allows you to associate each record series that you enter with a specific system. So I did a little survey of a small system that the state archives uses, our customer relations management system, and put some preliminary data in the fields just so you could kind of see the type of data that could be entered. There are instructions for all of these fields, and those are available to download. I'm going to run through some of these just to give you a sense of what they are and why they're needed. So the system's title, that can be the common name of the software system that people are using, formal or informal, but ideally you want to include a little bit more information about what the system does. So I have government record services, CRM software, or that's our customer relations management software. The more systems you add to this, the additional information about what the system does will be helpful. Key people involved in the inventory are the system owner, that's the primary person who uses the software, and IT support. Might be in-house IT, could be a contracted vendor, could be an actual vendor. Ours is a web-based software as a service, so our IT support is the software vendor. IT support can provide or clarify information on a lot of information on this form. So things like file types, system size, software, system documentation, backup procedures, provisions for migration. That's a lot of fields on this inventory form. System users, so the people who use the system will understand the purpose of the system, so how it's used in your organization, its relationship to other records. They can provide information on the dates that are covered by the system, provide a description of the system, backup procedures, restrictions on use, identify whether or not the records are critical for business. So all of that can cover a lot of information in these data fields. So keep on good terms with those people as you do the inventory. The dates of the records are going to be important for research and retention periods and for understanding the relationship of electronic records to other records. So for example, if you have the same records for a period in paper format, you would want to manage the electronic and the paper together. If they're not permanent, you should dispose of them at the same time as you can. If they are permanent, you want to monitor them to ensure their permanency, and also note that you have duplicates for disaster management purposes. The system description should just be a summary of the system's business purpose, the scope, the contents of the system, and the contents could just be a list of the data fields in the system. This field, the system description, also has I think the largest character capability. So if there's anything any information you want to have, but it doesn't fit in another field, you can add it to this field. The system size is going to help you plan storage and migration needs, and file formats need to be known for preservation and migration needs. Hardware and software is going to be information that also will help you plan for data migration, and you'll need to know about the hardware and software to ensure access to the records for their full retention period. If you pay for software as a service, both the software and the hardware are going to be maintained by the vendor, but if you want access to your data, you have to make sure that the subscription is maintained. Media characteristics, so things like media type and storage requirements for that media. If you're storing records on separate media, that must be known for migration purposes. We talked a little bit about relationship to other records. That means, does the same record exist in another format? And if so, which format is the official record copy? You may not have determined that, and that may be something to decide at the end of your inventory. If the electronic version, however, if you know it's not the official copy of record, then you may be able to periodically purge the system. System documentation is any information that supports the creation, maintenance, or use of electronic records or the systems. Separate indexes, data entry manuals, system documentation. I have our terms of service. We have some policies and procedures and instructions for using our software. Backup procedures, such as the frequency of backups or any media that you use and other backup procedures, is essential information to ensure vital records protection or records that are critical for your business operations. Provisions for migration is any information relevant to the migration or other maintenance needs of records to ensure that their ongoing use and also their access. And restrictions, just like paper records, there may be access restrictions to certain records. You would want to note what those, any reasons for those restrictions. So for example, if certain records are restricted by a law or a regulation, you would want to cite that law or regulation. That information is needed to ensure appropriate security for any records that are restricted. And then offices using the system can document whatever offices use the system. And it can also be an indication of one system that's frequently used by many offices. This may be an indication that the system is critical for business and requires additional protection and frequent remote backups. And if you don't have that, that might be something you would need to address in your records management plan. And even the systems form is going to list record series that are included in the system. You need to know those for retention and access, but also you're going to list them here. They will be discussed or is described in more detail on the records form, but you may not get to that immediately. So if you have them here, you won't have to, you'll have them noted and you can address them with the records form. Also information on the person conducting the inventory and the inventory date. And there's a checkbox to indicate that the entry is complete. If you don't complete the entry, leave it unchecked and you can run a report and it'll give you a list of the forms that need to be completed. This is the records form, and you're going to complete the data fields on each individual record series in a single system. Many of the fields are similar to those that you would use for paper records, like creator, series title, schedule number, the dates. And then other fields relate to the electronic format, like file types, the total size in kilobytes, megabytes, or gigabytes, electronic media associated with the records, password, compression, and system information. Something to keep in mind as you complete the different forms, systems, or records that somebody else who doesn't use the system might need to access this information. So avoid using jargon or informal titles or abbreviations or personal names. A lot of the inventory is going to involve talking with participants. And you may want to include IT during the discussions. If they are able to participate in the interviews, they may be helpful in providing everyone with a bigger picture of system capabilities. That can be very enlightening. It's important to communicate to those that you plan on meeting with and explaining why you're doing the inventory and remind them of goals and the benefits. And let them know if they need to prepare anything in advance. So in some circumstances, it could be a good way to do the inventory is to send out the inventory forms to those who are participating, have them complete the forms, and then conduct the interview by going over the information that they provide. It's important to let them know how much time is going to be needed. And when you meet with them, if you meet in their work environment, that can be a good way to learn about what they do and to help them not overlook any records that may need to be addressed. Also, meeting in individual departments during data collection can help with understanding how work is performed within each department. Whether a department involves different units and if those units use the same or different systems to do their work, and also what records are involved in each system. The focus of the conversation should be completing the inventory data. However, talking about how the records are used can help determine when and how copies of records are made, how they might be shared, and also which records are the official records. You may not get all the information that you need during the first pass of the interviews. People may not be available, and you may have to get information from outside your organization. So, for example, if a vendor supports your system or you work with a contracted IT person. You may also need to clarify any data or information that people provide you with. Let people know during the initial interview that you may need to follow up with them. So after the data collection, you'll analyze the results to identify needs and develop a records management plan. And you should commit to maintaining the inventory data because could be a very large project and you'll only want to do it once. So Karen and I are going to talk about these things in a little more detail on the next slides. So once you've collected your data, you may find some issues. Some possible issues are planned system replacements or upgrades, which actually it could be very timely because when you're planning a new system, you want to be able to identify the records and the retention periods in order to plan retention and disposition into those systems. There could be a lack of backups or a need for more frequent backups. You may have proprietary systems with records in a format that can't be easily transferred to another system. That could be problematic if the records are long-term. You might also find that software and hardware upgrades are necessary or file formats need to be migrated. You also might find a system storing a lot of obsolete records that need to be addressed, something we were talking about earlier. Everything you discover might not be an issue, though. For example, you might find a system that can maintain a complete record series for its full retention period in an electronic format. And for that reason, if you're also keeping the same record on paper, you may be able to dispose of the paper. If you do find issues, they'll probably need to be prioritized. You need to determine what you can address now, what needs investment and planning, and what presents a serious risk to your government. There may be some things that can be fixed easily or addressed right away, like documenting existing formats, official record copies, and possibly even deleting obsolete records. Bigger issues, like maybe hiring a specialist to address a legacy system, may need planning, approval, funding, maybe even extra staff time allocated or more staff, or all of the above. Hopefully, before you started the inventory, you did get management support and you got staff buy-in, and maybe, or hopefully, you formed a team, not only to collect the inventory data, but also to use the results to develop a plan and address any issues identified. Your plan might need to be divided into short, mid, and long-range goals depending upon your findings and circumstances. Again, you may discover good things like a department with a well-designed system, or maybe an electronic content management system that's underutilized and can be shared with other departments. Your team should document a plan for your goals based on consensus, put it in writing, make it flexible, and review it periodically. So starting small can make things manageable, can also show progress, and that progress can garner support for the bigger issues. So at this point, Karen is going to talk about some policies and procedures that you might develop after your inventory.
Um, so let's talk about policies and procedures. As you uncover potential issues that Maria talked about, there may be a need to address some of these through policy. Questions that you could consider about your policies and current procedures is that do the existing policies and procedures need refinement, or are the policies lacking altogether? What new policies and procedures need to be developed? And it's important, policies and procedures uh, to have in place for managing electronic records because in particular, they help prove the authenticity of your electronic records. Written policy and procedures help document that your records are created, maintained, and destroyed according to a plan and not on an ad hoc basis. This is essential for using your electronic records as evidence of your program and work processes. Within your policy and procedures, you should assign roles and responsibilities, and then make sure that you train your staff about these responsibilities. Policy topics to include could be e-records creation. An example could be unstructured records, including version control and identifying the official copy. We talked a little bit about that previously. Electronic file naming conventions and directory folder naming organization. Uh, a step-by-step procedure should be in place to maintain consistency with your conventions. Also, confidentiality of records, describing limited access, firewalls, passwords, acceptable use, procedure dealing in this case with email, retention and disposition, identifying and storing records by retention dates, and an important procedure is disaster preparedness and discussing backup plans. Let's consider policy components for electronic record systems. Each department must determine specifically who has the authority to create, name, alter, and delete documents from any electronic system. All staff needs to be informed of and receive training on the policies and procedures regarding creation, maintenance, access to, security, retention, and legal disposition of electronic documents. Each department should maintain written documentation of the design of any electronic record keeping system and policies regarding its maintenance and use. And this may include making sure automated office records support organizational needs, creating a single filing system or central repository for electronic office documents whenever the technology permits, or developing standardized naming conventions for documents and electronic folders, developing criteria and practices for managing inactive records and for disposing of obsolete records, providing for security and physical preservation of electronic records, And I'd just like to mention that we have some sample policies and procedures on our website, so feel free to take a look at those when you have time available. Migration plans for electronic information systems. A local government or agency must ensure that it develops a migration plan as part of the planning for any new automated information system. These migration plans should include guidelines for maintaining data in non-proprietary formats, timelines for updating hardware and software, and strategies for following and staying current for technological changes. Migration should be undertaken at no longer than 5-year intervals. We've mentioned briefly about file plans. It's recommended your government or agency adopt a file plan for both electronic and paper records, establishing naming conventions and what should be included in each file name. Using an appropriate filing system, for example, alphabetically, numerically, or alphanumeric, or use a filing system with access provided entirely by a database. Anticipate retention in your system. Try not to file records with different retention periods together, because you may someday have to implement a purging project. And that's true of electronic records as well as paper records. If it's unavoidable, separate records within the same folder by retention periods. You should coordinate paper and electronic record files. If you destroy paper records according to a defined retention period, you must also destroy the electronic counterpart according to that same schedule. It's essential that you follow consistent file naming conventions. Consistency will make it easier for others to understand how things are filed and to follow the convention. You should use logical specific names and dates if possible. The goal would be to be able to tell what the file is without actually having to open it. So this is an example of a file plan. You have a finance folder on a drive P. At the next level, there's a general ledger and payroll registers, which could be equivalent to paper folders. Then file names. These should be simple, short as possible, and easy to understand. An example would be minutes, and then the date, like 2023-02-15. Then we know the type of minutes by where they're filed, and the date is written for auto sorting of files. So you should use your retention schedule to design a meaningful system for your records naming conventions. Maintaining and updating the inventory, as well as related policies and procedures, should become a routine part of your records management program. All of these efforts should include one or more staff, as well as management, supporting this new component of your records management program. You spent considerable time collecting the inventory data. It's not for a one-time use, and you certainly don't want to start from scratch each time you need to do an inventory. So it's important to maintain the information in a database if possible, such as the one created for this purpose by the state archives. Also use the inventory for future planning. As systems, technology, and budgets allow, plan for future projects or for new potential issues. Address applications to be upgraded or replaced by asking, will the older data be maintained or converted? Will all the information be transferred as needed to retain its integrity? What about storage devices, upgraded servers, network infrastructure changes, mobile devices like smartphones and tablets? You also might need to add more fields to the inventory and use it to plan migration and document records destruction. This type of information should be tracked continuously. Use the inventory to maintain new information. Records management needs to be involved in future system planning. IT is generally more concerned with how a new system will integrate into their current technology infrastructure and less on the managing of the records contained within. As an RMO, you need to be concerned about the records contained within each system. Some closing recommendations. While all the information presented today is important, um, these are 4 key points for you to keep in mind. The first is to communicate, make sure senior management, department heads, and interviewees all know why this is important, why you are doing an inventory, and what their role is in the process. You should work with IT. They must be involved to clarify what are issues and what are not. Have patience and ask them to explain things in common terms if you don't understand something. Share your records expertise and be patient with IT who may be new to records management as well. A third point is to integrate records management into IT planning. This will save everyone time in the long run as well as reduce potential risk to your government organization. Be realistic. Address one function area at a time. It took a long time to get where you are today, for better or for worse, so don't expect to address all systems and issues overnight. Plan accordingly, and as you compile information, make adjustments as needed. Keep the project moving to show progress, revisit issues that arose or were discovered. And finally, use resources that are available, such as the State Archives Electronic Records Inventory Forms and database that you can find information and the forms on our website. And please reach out for help or guidance. You can contact your RAO or the state agency services. And we'll see if we have some time for questions. I'm going to turn the mic back over to Rich.
Thanks, everybody. Sorry again for the technical difficulties. There must be some gremlins in the system here. Fortunately, Karen and I share offices, and we were able to look at each other's monitors. But we can stay on as long as folks want to take questions. Um, Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and take a look to see in the chat feature. If you do have questions, please go ahead and place your questions and ask your questions in our chat. Let's see here. We got here's Maria asks a question. Maria asks, do you have an example of a policy and procedures that include electronic records? We currently have them for paper records.
We do. Available on our forms and tools page, there is an outline of records management policies and procedures. So things that you would want to include when you get to it, it includes policies and procedures for all different records management scenarios or whatever. So it covers inactive records, it covers paper records, it covers, so you have to find the electronic records section, and then it will provide you with content that you would use to develop your own policy for managing records. We may have a few that were developed as part of grant projects that we could share with you. So ask your records advisor or state agency services, and we may be able to provide you with some samples.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Here's a question from Kathy. Does the LGS one also apply to electronic records, or is there another document?
We get that question a lot, but that was the first thing I covered. Your electronic records have the same retention keeping requirements as your paper records. So it depends on the content of your electronic records. You'll use your schedule to identify the record series contained in the electronic format, find the matching item in the schedule, and then you'll know its retention period. So the retention schedule covers records regardless of their format. And your advisor can help you use the schedule if you need some assistance with that.
Okay, have a question here. It's from Lee. Our agency currently has a lot of unstructured data, filed, shared networks, etc. Would the goal be to eventually have all electronic records in structured systems?
I don't I don't want to talk over you, Karen, if you wanted to comment on anything, but I was just going to say that that was something Karen and I were saying could be the topic of an entire webinar dealing with the unstructured records. So we kind of touched on it at the end. If you're going to maintain records on a network, a shared network, you want to develop a good filing plan, one that is built around what the records are, the dates of the records, and their retention period, so that you can secure any records that are permanent or long-term, and also any that are not permanent, you'll know their retention period and you can set up some procedures to dispose of those on a regular basis. The weeding through all of the stuff on a local area network or a shared network, that can be a chore in itself because there are probably lots of non-records, reference material, versions. I guess a project would be to identify what the records actually are and set up a filing plan for those. There is also the possibility of transferring those records into something like an electronic content management system that Karen mentioned, and that would be something that we recommend because it's a much more automated way to manage different records with different retention periods. But maybe that's the topic for another webinar.
And speaking of topics, here's an interesting question from Keisha. How do you change the culture in the office with staff that are used to keeping their own records? And she puts own in quotes.
I'm wondering if she means keeping them on their own computer and not on the network or not in some sort of a shared repository. Because I mean, that might be something that could be addressed with policies and procedures. So for example, the policy could be that no one, oh, I see both actually. uh, you could, implement a policy that no one can keep records on their own computer. Once a record is created and complete, it's filed in a filing system on the network, or if you have a content management system, a template is created for that type of record and you file it in the content management system. So kind of part of the inventory process is to discover all those things. Are there a lot of people keeping records on their computers that aren't backed up, or nobody knows that they exist? That might be something that you discover during an inventory and you address afterwards with a plan that involves some policy and procedures for how they're currently managing their records. It may have just been the culture and it's something that needs to change in order to improve the management of records.
Okay, Maria, we have a question here from Carrie. Is there a specific type of PDF-A that is recommended for documents, such as PDF-A 1, 2, 3?
Well, one thing we recommend PDF-A, that's the archival version of the standard PDF format for permanent records or long-term records. That is a format that's known to retain formatting longer than a standard PDF. So right now, that's the industry standard for long-term records, a PDF-A. And we do, I believe, on our website under records management and publications, we have a web page that discusses PDF-A and other PDF formats.
Okay, we have a question here from Michael. He says it's kind of a difficult question. We'll see. When I'm trying to communicate with divisions about records management, I try to provide them with benefits as to why they should manage their records adequately. Aside from compliance, do you have any hard-hitting strategies or demonstrative benefits to why records management is important? In other words, I'm looking for a more compelling way to drill home the importance of records management aside from compliance.
So you're looking for a stick as opposed to the carrot. Um, well, it is the law. And you could cite the Arts and Cultural Affairs Law, which requires everyone, all officials, to participate in a records management program. And it kind of lists everything that they're required to do: identify their records, retain them for as long as needed, dispose of them appropriately. So that would mean following the retention schedule, also identifying inactive records, permanent records, and supporting the work of the records management officer. That's a legal requirement. So you could throw that at them.
And Kristen chimed in. She says, Michael, you could add cost savings if the number of records determines how much money is spent for a system, and by destroying eligible records and ensuring that anything not under retention is destroyed when no longer needed. Staff will have an easier time locating files they need. It also reduces the number of records to be produced during legal or FOIL requests.
Oh, that's a beautiful response. And cost savings will show management some tangible evidence, and they like to see things like cost savings. Great response. Who was that?
That was Kristen.
Kristen, way to go.
And Lee she said she appreciated that answer you gave her, and she said I would, or he could be, I would definitely attend a webinar on unstructured records management if you do hold one in the future. So some input there. And we have Joe. Do you make available guidance regarding implementing records management in Microsoft Teams / SharePoint, etc., including naming conventions, duplicate records, etc.?
Well, we could certainly provide guidance. I don't think we have anything, any documentation to share at the moment, but we can certainly, if you want to contact your records advisor, we can certainly provide some guidance. That might be something that we could incorporate into a webinar at some point as well.
Okay, Maria S. asks a question. Should electronic forms created to replace paper in a local government be treated as if they were still in paper form, set up with a retention time for the LGS, for example, or et cetera?
I think I know what you're asking. If would the are you saying the electronic format has replaced the paper record? If that's the case, then absolutely. You want to make sure that their retention periods are identified and they're managed appropriately, especially if they're permanent records. That those were unstructured records or potentially unstructured records that Karen mentioned. You want to make sure are part of your inventory. Even if you are focusing on systems, but you want to also include those any unstructured permanent records that are paper records that have been digitized, especially if they've replaced the paper. Not sure, does that answer your question?
And Maria said yes. So thanks, Maria. Now, Joe says, I am not a government archivist, so don't have an RAO. Who would you suggest I contact?
Well, we do support historical records repositories, if that's who you are, and nonprofits. So if you have a question, you could just send your question to the email on the screen, recmanagement@nysed.gov, and we can see if we can assist you.
All right, we're about 20 minutes past the hour and kind of giving some time here due to our couple of delays we had. But maybe if anybody has, let's see if we have another question or so.
You can always send us questions to the Rec Management email address, and you can always contact your records advisor. We're here to support you in your records management program.
Okay, well, it looks like I think we're wrapped up here with the questions. And so having no more questions, I think we'll call it a wrap.
Great. Thanks for everyone who attended.